In our world in IT, we understand how to configure servers and routers and firewalls, but it's the people problems that are often the most challenging for us. Other speakers, especially within the realm of customer service, may be talking about procedures for dealing with customers, but I change hearts and minds. It's 1962, the playground behind Lee School in Columbia, Missouri, and it's time for the PE softball game. I'm up to bat, and I'm terrified. I was one of those kids who was always the last one picked when it was time to choose teams. Some of you can probably relate. Well, the kids are jeering, the pitcher is sneering, and I'm terrified. And I just want it to be over. The pitcher winds up, and he pitches. I close my eyes, and I swing, and I hear the familiar sound of the bat cutting through the air. The kids are jeering because they've seen this played out before. They know what's going to happen. It's going to be an easy out. The catcher throws the ball back to the pitcher. The pitcher winds up. He pitches again. I close my eyes and I swing again. And again, I hear the sound of the bat cutting through the air. The kids are jeering and they're making fun of me. The pitcher is sneering. He thinks this is going to be over and done with this next pitch. So he winds up, he pitches, I close my eyes and I swing, and I hear a sound I've never heard before. I hear the crack of the bat connecting with the ball, and I feel the shock wave through the handle. I had no idea what that was. I open my eyes and the ball is soaring into the outfield. Well, I'm still standing at home plate and the kids are yelling, "Run, Don, run!" So I take off down the baseline with all the speed my clumsy 8-year-old legs can muster. I run toward first base and the coach is waving me on. So I run on towards second base and they're yelling, "Keep going, keep going!" So I keep going and I run toward third, and guess what? The third base coach is waving me on, and so I run to home and I cross the plate. And the kids are yelling, "Touch the plate, touch the plate!" I thought they meant third base. So I go running back down the baseline toward third base, and I get tagged out. And I lost the only home run of my life. Now, fast forward a few years, and I've made new friends, and this group of friends, we were all very supportive of each other. In fact, I'm still friends with them to this day. And we all began to succeed. And therein lies the power of the team. The power is to support and lift up all of its members. As a leader, you must create an environment that fosters support for the individual team members by the other team members. So today, we're going to talk about how to build a powerful, high-performing IT team. Now, we're going to assume for the purpose of this discussion, this session, that you've already hired the right people. And so the question we're going to deal with in this session is, how do you manage them? In this session, you'll learn characteristics of great leaders, the differences between being a manager and being a leader, the 5 stages of team development, 3 critical success factors for team leaders, tools for managing conflict, and the 4 foundations of managing people. As we go through this session, there will be 2 recurring themes. The first is that you, as a leader, must have a laser-like focus on the goals for the team, and you must help your team maintain that as well. Clarity is paramount to success. The second theme is that you must involve your team members in decision-making. Involve them in deciding what, if any, team-building activities would be effective for your team. And you must also involve them in deciding which tasks are best for individual work and which tasks are best dealt with collaboratively. So, how do you create a high-performing team out of the right people? Well, it's really all about being a great leader. So, When you think about the difference between being a leader and being a manager, what are some of the differences that come to mind? Now, here's an activity. Let's take 60 seconds or so, and on a piece of paper or on your device, make 2 columns and label one managers and label the other one leaders. Now, write down the characteristics of leaders in the leader column and the characteristics of managers in the managers column. And it's certainly possible that some characteristics will appear in both columns. Some of the responses I've heard from live audiences in the past include managers accomplish tasks, leaders accomplish goals. Another one, managers take credit, leaders give credit. Managers tell people to follow them, leaders have people follow them. Managers are more task-based, and leaders are more relationship-based. Here are some characteristics of leaders: honesty and integrity. You can trust them. In fact, in the book The Leadership Challenge, Kouzes and Posner emphasize that honesty and integrity are the foundational traits of leaders, without which there can be no leadership. Leaders also have strong communication skills. They're able to express their ideas clearly so you can understand them. Leaders exude confidence and inspire confidence. They are innovative. They're not working on yesterday, they're working on what's relevant for tomorrow. They have humility. When you are a humble leader, you give credit to the team for their accomplishments. I have 2 sons, and they played football when they were little. And they had a wonderful coach who would always give the boys credit when they succeeded. And he would always take the blame when they had problems. Now, he wouldn't let them off the hook if they did something wrong, but he was very clear that if they did things right, they got the credit. And when there was a problem, he took the fall for it. Leaders are inspirational. Great leaders take responsibility for the outcomes of the team, whether they hit the goals or not. They delegate and they empower. So they delegate to team members the ability to do whatever the tasks are that need to be done. And they empower them with the tools and the responsibilities and the authority that they need in order to get it done. Now, you could certainly go on and on with a list describing the qualities of leaders, but for our purpose, let's make the last quality that they have empathy. They have the ability to put themselves in another person's position, to feel what that person is feeling, or at least to imagine what they're feeling. And that, to me, is one of the 5 principles of IT customer service success, which you've probably heard me talk about. One of the principles is the ability to imagine what the other person is going through and to put yourself in their position. Simon Baron-Cohen, who is a psychologist and a researcher, wrote a book called The Science of Evil. Kind of a creepy title, but it's a fascinating, very well-written book. And in it, he studied how people were cruel to each other and what caused it. He said that in the presence of empathy, there can be no evil. And so great leaders have empathy. They have empathy for their team members. They have empathy for their colleagues. They have empathy for their customers. And that certainly is a quality of a leader. Do you agree or disagree with the list? Now, having covered some of the qualities of great leaders, now, what are some characteristics of poor leaders? Well, again, thinking back to some of the live sessions that we've done in the past, some of the responses include micromanagement. They demand rather than ask. They don't listen and they think they're always right. Their way is always right, my way or the highway. They focus on the negative instead of the positive. They're very critical. They take all of the work for themselves and they don't empower their employees to make those decisions. A fundamental concept of leadership, and really also of management, is to be successful through the efforts of other people, the people whom you guide and direct. Have you ever worked for a bad leader or manager? Take a moment and think about what it was like. Think of what that person did that made them a bad leader or a bad manager. Now, conversely, have you ever worked for a great leader who inspired you? Well, take a moment and think about what it was like. Think of what that person did that made them a great leader. Now think about the difference in how it felt when you were in those positions. So here's the tough question. But think about the characteristics of good leaders and think about the characteristics of bad leaders. And the question for you is, which one are you? In the live sessions that I conduct, many people will respond both, and that's certainly true, that sometimes we fall into either one of the categories, or even both, sometimes at the same time. I'm not proud of it, but I've made those types of mistakes as a leader, as a manager, and would have been characterized as a bad leader by some people. I'm not proud of that. But like you, I'm human and imperfect. As someone striving to be a great leader, you must be aware of the characteristics of bad leaders. Think about the bad leaders that you've had and make sure that you don't act in that way with the people who are on your team. Admittedly, it's simple for me to stand in front of you and say this. It's sometimes harder to actually do it right? But you also want to think about the great leaders that you've worked for and emulate them. How did they inspire and motivate you? How did they model the behavior that they wanted in their teams? A great starting point in building a great team is to think about the great leaders you've worked for and emulate them. But also think about the bad leaders you've worked for and use them as an example of what not to do. It's pretty simple to start the journey toward great leadership. But there are two concepts that will help you on your journey, and the first is the concept of awareness. We talked about that a few minutes ago. You are aware when you're acting like a bad leader. And you want to be intentional about using the traits of the good leaders. You want to be intentional about changing your behavior to acting like a good leader. You're intentional about leading the people who have entrusted their livelihood to you to give them good direction and to help them grow as individuals. You're aware of the characteristics of good leaders and poor leaders. You strive to be aware when you start to fall down, when you start to behave like the people in the poor leader column. Now let's be real here. Sometimes, as a manager or as a leader, you get frustrated, right? Maybe you just want to move things forward. And so maybe you put your foot down and demand instead of ask. Or you criticize without reassuring. Or you forget to give credit. It happens. You just want to be aware of what you're doing, when you're doing that, and then try to put the brakes on it and be intentional about making behavior choices like the great leaders you worked for or those whom you admired. In 1965, Bruce Tuckman, a psychologist, created 4 stages of team evolution for a paper that he published. Now, perhaps you're familiar with this. The Tuckman's 4 stages are a pretty accurate pathway that describes most teams during their lifespan. It starts with forming, then it goes to storming, then norming, and finally performing. And he actually created a 5th stage later on, which he called a journey or a mourning, which is the end of the team's life. So over the next few minutes, we're going to take a little closer look at each one of the stages. We'll start with forming, and in the forming stage, your team members are polite and they're respectful. They're very positive, they're upbeat. There's some anxiety amongst them because they're not really clear about the direction that the team's going to go. It's too early in the process for them to know that. But on the other hand, there's some excitement because it's something new. And it's exciting to be a part of a new team. But even with people who are excited, there's still a bit of anxiety due to the fear of the unknown. Your role as a leader is critical at this stage to establish goals and responsibilities and to let people know what their role is in the team. You have to define that very clearly for each of the team members. Now, this stage can also last for a while as people kind of get things figured out. How long it lasts is going to vary based on the team. When your team is in the forming stage, it's important for you to be clear about roles, responsibilities, and goals for the team. Especially the goals for the team at this stage so that you can then move on to the next stage. The next stage is storming, which comes after people get used to being with each other and working with each other. That's when things start to change a little bit. Instead of being polite and everybody getting along, they may start to push back against some of the ideas that you're putting forth and some of the boundaries that you may have created. This is also when a conflict between individual team members based on work styles can cause the team to fail, or at least to be stuck in the storming stage. Storming can also occur when members start to challenge your authority as a leader. You need to be very clear about your vision for the team. You must reinforce roles and responsibilities and goals for the team. If there's any lack of clarity on the nature of the relationships between the team members, that can cause frustration amongst the team members and can cause problems. That is a typical aspect of the storming stage, and you may find that team members in the storming phase disagree not only with your leadership, but also with the overall goals of the team. They may question the value of the team's goals, which can then undermine the team's progress. They may become hesitant to take assignments. And this is also when members can start to experience some stress again because of the conflicts with other team members. If your team is in the storming stage, again, clarity is paramount. Clarity about goals, clarity about roles, and clarity about responsibilities. Talk to the team members about the 4 stages of team development and let them know that you feel like they're in the storming stage. Talk about what you would like to see done to move forward and to get past it. Consider doing additional reading on Tuckman's 4 stages of team development on your own, especially if you're in the storming stage. The other comment that I'd make about the storming stage is this. It can last for a long time, and the best way to shorten the time in the storming stage is clarity. It's to be clear about goals, roles, and responsibilities. Now, we've done forming and storming. Now we're on to norming. This is a phase that teams tend to move into fairly gradually. As you start to resolve your differences as team members, you start to see your colleagues more objectively. You see them as people who are capable of doing their job, who have certain talents that you need. They begin to respect the leader's authority. In this stage, your members may start to socialize with each other. They're now able to ask each other for constructive feedback and input on how to do the job. They also may feel a stronger commitment to the team. And you may see that progress toward the goals becomes more obvious in the norming stage. There can also be a pretty significant overlap between storming and norming. In fact, these stages are fluid and they're dynamic. So you may see your team moving to what you think is norming, and then all of a sudden there's a new task that's assigned and they go back to storming. That's where they work out the details. Or maybe you bring in a new team member and the dynamics change, back to storming. So be prepared once your team moves into the norming stage not to stay there. Expect to occasionally move back and forth. And it's not necessarily regressing as much as just a dynamic state that moves back and forth between the two levels. The fourth stage is performing. In the performing stage, this is when your team starts to act like a well-oiled machine, and it's very comfortable, and you see much progress toward the end goal. Also, in the performing stage, because the team is well established, as members come and go, there's less likelihood of disruption to the team because you've been through all of these phases. When you bring in a new team member, there can be some disruption, of course. You might go through a little bit of storming, but the other team members are all pretty well established. And so it tends to not be as disruptive as it is in the early stages of the team. Now, the fifth and final stage is the mourning, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, or the adjourning stage. It's mourning as in getting over a loss, and this can happen when the team is disbanded, either because maybe it's a project team and the project is complete. Maybe there's a reorganization and the team is disbanded because of that. But regardless of the cause, here's what can happen. You'll have certain team members who thrive on routine, and all of a sudden, their routine is disrupted, and now they don't know what to do. If it's a disbandment because of a reorganization, they can become concerned about what the future holds. The uncertainty can be a problem. And once again, this is a time for communication, letting people know what's going on and being as transparent as you possibly can. Here's a question. This is a question frequently asked in live sessions. Is the storming stage, by virtue of its name, a bad stage, or is it just a normal part of the process? Hey, it's just a normal part of the process. Unfortunately, there are some negative things that can happen during the storming stage. For example, teams can fail if you, as a leader, don't manage it. If you're not communicating very clearly, there's that clarity again. If you're not communicating very clearly the goals of the team, and you're not communicating very clearly the roles and responsibilities of the team members, a team can fail in the storming stage. Something else that's critically important in the early stages of team development is to be clear with the team members about how they are to interact with each other, to establish some rules, some boundaries. One of the things that I like to talk with people about is rules for civil behavior, where we talk about particular issues. If, for example, there's a problem with a team, we talk about the specific issues in the team. We don't discuss personalities or character. We don't try to undermine each other. We deal with specific issues, specific behaviors. So we've talked about the importance of leadership. We've talked about Tuckman stages of team development. Now, let's talk about some specifics of how to lead great teams. Let's give you some practical tools that you can take back to your workplace and use right away. Number one is reward problem solving. Now, think about why we got into IT. Or if you're an owner or a manager without a tech background, think about the tech people who work for you and why they got into IT. If you're not sure, ask them. I'm a tech, and many of us, maybe most of us, get into IT because we enjoy problem solving. We like to take a puzzle and figure it out. We love to troubleshoot and track things down. And that's a big part of what we do. So, as a team leader, you want to be sure to encourage and reward problem solving and troubleshooting. Here's something to think about. Don't limit it just to technical problem solving. Make your team aware of everything that's going on within the organization. Give them as much performance data as you're comfortable sharing. Give them customer reviews, customer performance data, and let them deal with the data. Let them analyze it and think of ways to improve not just technical performance, but the performance of the business overall. Most technical people love data, so why not put them to work on problem solving even beyond the scope of IT? So reward problem solving. Recognize that as long as you're paying people a competitive wage and you're providing competitive benefits, that your people may be motivated more by other forms of rewards than just financial. And one of them is to recognize their talents as problem solvers and to let them tackle problems within the organization. So reward problem solving. Number 2 is to lead more than manage. We've already talked about this quite a bit, but here's a quote from John Maxwell, who said that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. I would say to have a positive influence, to inspire your team. And Peter Drucker, the great management consultant, said that managing is about doing things. Leadership is about doing the right thing. So when you're working with highly intelligent IT teams, which most of them are, you need to provide more leadership than management. Let them figure out how to do things in the way that makes the most sense, as long as it's legal and ethical and doesn't violate company policy. So lead more than manage. Number 3 is to resolve conflicts and inspire cooperation. And we're going to stay on this one for a little bit, because when you have conflict, your ability to resolve that conflict is paramount to the long-term success of the team. For example, if you have a conflict during storming, your ability to resolve that conflict successfully is what's going to allow you to move into norming. And while it's true in any phase, it's especially important in storming. So, how do we resolve conflict? Well, first of all, we need to understand that there are different types of conflict, different types of reaction to conflict, and different ways in which people handle conflict. John Gottman is a psychology professor at the University of Washington here in Seattle, where I'm based. He and his wife created a foundation which has studied people's relationships. Now, they work a lot in marriage, but his ideas about relationships and how people handle conflict apply in the workplace as well as in personal relationships. Gottman has identified 4 deadly techniques for dealing with conflict, which he calls the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse. These 4 deadly techniques are deadly because they will undermine any chance for a successful relationship. They will undermine any chance for successful conflict resolution. Now, the first one is criticism. Now, criticism is not necessarily bad. The problem is when it moves away from the task or the issues at hand and it gets into personality or character assassination. And that's what you want to avoid. So if you see that happening in your team, you need to put a stop to it by focusing the team on its goals and focusing any of the conflict on the particular issues. Here's an example. If you say to somebody, "You have a bad attitude," what does that mean? They don't know what that means. It's like they don't know how to fix that. But if you say to them, when you're late, which you have been 5 times in a row, it causes the entire team to get behind on their projects. So it's critically important that you be on time. Plus, other team members feel it's disrespectful for them, and it's causing problems with the other team members. By handling it that way, you're dealing specifically with the issues as opposed to going after their character. They then understand the specific behavior you want and the ramifications of the actions on the team, of their actions on the team. So be very careful about criticism. Keep it focused on the issues and the tasks, not on personality nor character. Next is contempt. And when one person shows contempt for another one, what does the second person do? They dig in their heels, right? And they get defensive, and you don't make any progress. Examples of contempt include insults attacking their character, their self-worth, name-calling, such as "you're an idiot." It can also be found in sarcasm and mocking. So, when you make fun of somebody, that's a sign of contempt. Also, nonverbal behaviors such as sneering and rolling eyes. If you're seeing that in your workplace, that's something that you need to deal with right away. Making fun of another person or encouraging other people to make fun of somebody is also a sign of contempt. And you've got to deal with it immediately. Next is defensiveness. And that's when you're unwilling to accept responsibility for what's happened or for what you did. You see yourself as a victim. Defensive people aren't willing to listen to other people's constructive criticism. They often whine. They blame everybody else for their problems. They use phrases like, "It's not fair," or "It's not my fault." They try to deflect complaints by turning them around. They'll say things like, "Well, I might have been late, but Phil over there, he leaves 30 minutes early every day, and he takes 90-minute lunch breaks." Of course, Phil's behavior has nothing to do with the person that you're talking to. You want to focus them back on their behavior. They just don't want to accept responsibility for their own behavior, so they become defensive about it. Lastly is stonewalling. Now, stonewalling is where the person just shuts down. It's not that they want to take a break and come back to it later. They just shut down. They don't respond. They may even get up and walk away, not with the intention of coming back to deal with it later when cooler heads can prevail, but they just don't want to deal with it at all. And that's a difficult behavior to deal with as a leader. If you encounter somebody who is stonewalling, I'd pull them aside into my office. I'd say something like, "Please talk to me. Let me know what's going on." But it may take a while for you to draw them out. So when you encounter any of these 4 horsemen of the apocalypse traits, characteristics, that's a conflict that you've got to deal with. And it's not a productive way of dealing with conflict. So you've got to address these 4 behaviors with the person who is exhibiting them. You've got to address them right away. Now let's talk about how to inspire cooperation. We've talked about the negative, brought everybody down, right? So here's some tips on inspiring cooperation. Number 1, we've talked about it before, but it's critically important. Keep your team focused on the goals. Number 2 is establish how your team members are allowed to interact with each other. Talk about respectful communication. Even if you disagree, talk about sticking to the issues. Explain the why. Simon Sinek reminds us that without the why, the how and the what don't matter. It's amazing how many team leaders don't explain the why. So give your team members the why, and they'll make the right decision on their own. Number 3 is model the behavior you want from your team. People don't do what we say, they do what we do. So make sure if you want them to act in a certain way toward clients, that's how you always act toward clients. That if you want them to act in a certain way toward each other, that you model that behavior as you interact with the other team members. So you're modeling the behavior and they will do what you do. Now, it may take a while, but they'll get it. Number 4 is use stories as a teaching tool. You can use stories in team meetings or even on one-on-ones. Managers often stand up in front of their team and do a data dump. And your team members kind of glaze over, right? Even if they're interested in what you're saying, they're not interested in hearing you recite dry data. When you tell a story, you draw them in and you get their attention. Now, the key on storytelling is to give enough background information that the story makes sense without getting bogged down in minutia. Practice your story, especially focusing on how you're going to end it to make your point. Now, there are many online resources for storytelling. Just search on storytelling online and you'll find plenty of resources to help you find, develop, and tell stories. So use storytelling to persuade people to do the behaviors that you want. Number 5 is encourage team members to get to know each other as individuals. And what happens is that when they know each other as individuals, they tend to cut each other more slack. They're more willing to overlook minor little annoyances and instead see the whole person. They lose the label of dealing with a person as, say, a DBA or tech support or coder or network manager or whatever. And they start to see the person as Jason or Stephanie, as an individual. Number 6 is to be a great listener. One of the greatest gifts that we can give others is to be a great listener. And often we forget the basics of being a great listener. Stephen Covey, the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, a life-changing book, which if you haven't read, I strongly encourage you to read it. But Covey reminds us that one of the 7 habits is listen to understand, not just to respond. So when your people are talking, don't interrupt. Let them finish. Ask relevant questions to gain a deeper understanding. Number 7 is encourage diversity. Now, diversity is a term that is spoken frequently, and it comes in many forms, including diversity of culture, diversity of background, diversity of thought. You want to be around people who challenge you, people who feel free to disagree with you, people who come from a completely different background. My best friend in Seattle is a man who feels exactly the opposite of the way that I do on politics and religion. When you're willing to bring in people who will challenge you, people who disagree with you respectfully, and who have a different perspective from yours, you can create a high-performing, innovating team that can accelerate your progress towards your goals. Encourage diversity in thought as well as in culture. Number 8 is to set challenging goals. Now, can you say with certainty that your team members know what their individual part is in accomplishing your goals? You can't accomplish goals if you don't have them, if you don't know what they are. So how do you set goals? Well, maybe you're familiar with the SMART concept for goals, which is where S is for very specific. So you have to establish specific goals. I'll give you an example in a minute. M is for measurable. They must be measurable because if you can't measure it, it's not a goal. A is for achievable. It has to be something that you can achieve. It has to be achievable. R is for relevant. It has to be relevant to the team's function. And T is for time-bound. So for example, here's something that's not a goal. We're going to improve our sales. Our goal is to improve our sales. That's not a goal. That's a wish, right? But what if your goal says, we're going to increase our sales by 10%? It's both specific and measurable. And a 10% goal is probably achievable, right? And it's relevant because we're in business. As we improve sales, that improves our business performance. And if we say we're going to increase our sales by December 31st, that makes it time-bound. And if you've not set goals for next week, next month, next year, it's past time to do that. And here's the thing about goals. You can set them, and then you can change them. It's not cast in stone. So you can actually go through and modify your goals if you feel the need to do so. But you've got to have goals because they provide a roadmap for where you're going. Now, one comment on this, I would also set a stretch goal. So get together with your team, talk about what the goals are, what they think the goal should be, and then once you establish what those goals are, think about something that you and your team might be able to achieve that's just a little beyond what they think they can achieve. That's your outside goal, your stretch goal. Tell your team when they achieve it that they'll get a specific reward. So you give them some incentive, but give them some kind of stretch goal as well. Number 9 is to be clear on vision and direction. There's that clarity again. So to do that, know your goals, make sure that you build your goals, your direction, and your vision based on your company's mission statement. Keep your vision simple and understandable. Don't use corporate jargon such as, "We hope to gain traction, verticals and horizontals, at the end of the day, bottom line," similar corporate speak. Same thing, by the way, with IT jargon. Put it to the best of your ability in plain language that anybody can understand. Put it in a language that your mom and dad could understand. Make it clear and simple. Don't be ambiguous. Be forward-thinking because, as we talked about in the very beginning of this session, that's something that's a characteristic of leaders that your people expect from you. Establish measurable timeframes for accomplishing the goals. Next is to be trustworthy. What does it mean to be trustworthy? That's pretty simple. Don't lie, ever. At some point, you'll get caught. People will remember it. Someone asked once, is it sometimes appropriate to tell a white lie? Well, here's what happens if you get caught. It undermines your credibility into the future, and it's very difficult to recover from it. When you get caught, even in a white lie, then in the back of their mind, from that point on, they'll wonder if you're telling them the truth. It's just not worth it. So don't lie, ever. Being trustworthy also means you follow through on commitments. Do what you say you'll do when you say you'll do it. Show fairness. Demonstrate transparency to the best of your ability. Be constructive and objective in performance reviews. And remember, when you're dealing with people, you want to praise publicly and criticize privately. Give credit where it's due and take responsibility for errors. When you make a mistake, you have a unique opportunity to win a customer for life because we all make mistakes. It's how we handle it when we make a mistake that really defines who we are. It describes our character and whether people want to do business with us, whether people want to be associated with us. Next is to encourage input, participation, and collaboration. When you're dealing with IT people, you're dealing with highly intelligent people. Most people in IT are smart. The field attracts people with pretty high intelligence. They want to let you know what they think, and they tend to have good ideas. Now, you don't have to agree with them, but their ideas are worth hearing. So be ready to hear ideas that you don't agree with. Learn how to say no respectfully. Remember that there's tremendous satisfaction for team members in accomplishing a goal together that they couldn't do individually. Get collaboration going with your team and encourage a lot of input. Leadership speaker and consultant Paul Senes identified 4 foundations of managing people. And number 1 is participatory management. And in participatory management, you recognize that the people who are doing the jobs have the best idea about how to do those jobs. Now, that's not to say that you can't support them and help them grow, but listen to your frontline people when they talk about how to solve problems, because they're on the front lines. They probably have the right idea. Let them participate in decision-making. Let them do it their way. As long as it's legal, ethical, and doesn't violate company policy, what do you care how they do it? As long as they get it done. Recognize that choices have consequences. So explain them. Talk about what the choices are. the choices that you might make. You might, for example, say to one of your techs, when you deal positively with a customer and build a great relationship with them, maybe even a personal relationship, it'll be a lot harder for them to pull the plug on our business relationship. The most successful MSPs know how critically important it is for people to have relationships with their customers. One of the most successful MSPs I know says it's even important to try to build personal relationships with customers. The reason is because the customer is a lot less likely to view your company as a commodity. And they're a lot less likely to make an impulse switch to a competitor. He said he charges more than any of his competitors, and yet people stay with his firm. And it's because of the relationships. Anybody who's been trained in sales will tell you that success is often based on the relationships that your people have with customers. When your people have relationships with customers, the customer is more likely to be forgiving when something goes wrong. Conversely, if they're rude and dismissive to a customer, then that makes them more likely to be seen as just a commodity. And they're more likely to lose that customer, which affects the bottom line. So explain the consequences of behavior to people. Finally, as a manager or leader, you need to get the roadblocks out of the way, especially for your high performers. I was a manager at a radio station a long time ago, and one of my jobs was to stay out of the way of these super talented people. Our station was the market leader with double the audience of our closest competitor. The one thing I did better than anything else is I stayed out of the way of the high performers. I supported them, and I stayed out of their way. So get the roadblocks out of your team members' way so they can do their jobs. We've talked about some of the tools for managing people. Now let's talk about team building activities. Now, isn't it interesting? We're doing a session on team building, and mainly what we've talked about is leadership, because that's how you build a great team. But there are team building activities that are worth mentioning. And I'm going to start by mentioning some team building activities that you probably should never do. With IT people, in my experience, when you start doing the typical team building, touchy-feely training session activities, they're going to run screaming from the room. So, what are some team building activities that might work well with IT people? Well, why not start by asking them? Say to your team members, I want to have some opportunities for us to do some activities together. What are some things that you might be interested in doing? Get their input. Don't be surprised if some of the activities are things that don't interest you. But it's not about you. It's about your team and what interests them. Having said that, here are some ideas. Many Silicon Valley firms encourage volunteering. You could volunteer as a group to go do something, to maybe work at a food bank, to work at a shelter, to walk homeless dogs, or to pick up trash. Put together a group to go make a difference in the community, because making a difference in the community and doing good, helping society, is a big thing for people. Now, you may have read about how it's really important for millennials, but it's actually really important for everybody. So get volunteering as a group. Maybe consider sports activities if your group is interested in it. Certainly, some of them won't be interested, but ask them. It could be a softball team, a bowling team, or running marathons. It could be walking groups. It could be gaming or VR activities. It doesn't have to be highly competitive, but sports activities might be an option. Field trips are another possibility. We found if you take people to area museums to learn more about the community, it helps build bonds between the team members. You could also do field trips to vendors, especially when they sponsor demonstrations. Take the team to interesting customer sites to help them gain a better understanding of what's going on out in the customer's world. They'll gain a better understanding of the problems faced by the customers, the people that they're dealing with. When you do it as a group, then they can come back and they talk about it as a shared group experience. You can also do professional development as a group. Send them all to take training together, and again, they come back and they talk about it. It bonds them together as individuals through a shared experience. Shared meals is also a very powerful team-building activity, and there's a couple of ways that this can go. At one company where I worked, the general manager would have a monthly all-hands meeting, and at this meeting, they'd serve breakfast, but the breakfast was prepared each month by different teams from the organization, different departments. The teams would compete to see who could make the most extravagant, the wildest, the greatest breakfast possible. They worked together as a team to make breakfast, and then they'd serve it in the conference room while the general manager gave a report on the state of the business. Everybody would sit down for a shared meal, which was a very powerful team-building activity. You could also have everybody go out for meals. You could have a dumpling night, a pasta night, or a pizza night. Another MSP owner said that his company brings in lunch for everybody once a week. He said it was a perk that they offered, a benefit. But I'll say it's way more than a perk or a benefit. It's a wonderful team-building and bonding activity to sit down for a shared meal. So find ways for your team to share experiences. The ideas for activities should come from your team and not from you. Talk to your team and they'll give you ideas. Remember that 8-year-old kid on the softball field? I've never been athletic, and I'm not saying if things had been different I would have been a great athlete, but what if instead of jeering and sneering, all of the kids would have been cheering from the very beginning? That's what happened later on with my new friends from high school. We were uplifting for each other, we encouraged, we supported each other. With your teams, you cheer and you support the team members, and you get each of the team members to do that as well. Get them to do it for each other, and you talk about the importance of being each other's cheerleader. My friend Jan Spence was the first full-tackle women's professional football player in the United States. And she talked about when she went to try out for the team, that all of the other women who were there for the tryouts were intimidated. A lot of them were getting ready to quit. She started cheerleading for her competitors, the other women who were trying out for the team, and because she was a cheerleader for them, a lot of these women went through the tryouts, and some of them actually made the team. And what would happen with your team members if all of them were uplifting, encouraging, and supporting of each other? That 8-year-old boy from back in 1962 is successful today because as he grew, all of the people around him supported him and encouraged him. You've got someone on your team right now who's just waiting to be a superstar. That person is counting on you as a leader to create an environment with peer support and encouragement. You'll find that person by building a great team through listening, being trustworthy, removing roadblocks, and supporting and encouraging your team, both as individuals and as a group. I'm Don Crawley. You can visit me online at doncrawley.com. I'm also on the usual social media channels, or check out my on-demand training at compassionategeek.com. If you have questions or comments and you're watching this at the live session playtime, join me in my Zoom room for the next 15 minutes. The link is in your chat window now. Otherwise, ping me on social media, and I'll see you soon.